This is my second video about imposter syndrome in book coaching. If you haven't listened to the first video, go do that and then come back to this one, because in that one, I talked about how imposter syndrome tends to show up. And in this one, I'm talking about what to do about it. So there's three things that I think help to combat imposter syndrome. The first is to simply understand what it is and where it comes from and when you're hearing it. And I think the very best way to do this is to read a fabulous book called Playing Big by Tara Moore. I love this book. I recommend it all the time to coaches, to writers, to friends, to anybody. I just think it is a fabulous book because it talks about the cultures that and the systems that tend to train us to think in this imposter syndrome way. And it's specifically speaking toward women. And I find that women have this sense of imposter syndrome more than men. So I bet that more women are listening to this than men are. And Tara Moore talks about why that is, all the way back to how our school systems are run, the cultural expectations that we have, the all kinds of systems that just teach women especially to tamp themselves down, to lower their voice, to turn down the volume, to not take up space. And understanding that these imposter syndrome feelings and ideas and voices are not necessarily from us, that they're things that we learn, they're things that we were gained by just being alive in the world today. That helps. At least it helps me to see where it comes from and why it's there and why we may be thinking the way that we're thinking. That it just is enormously illuminating to have it named like that. So just simply, the first thing is just simply understanding where it comes from and what it is and how it's showing up for you. The book Playing Big has a lot of exercises where you do things to try to understand the particular way imposter syndrome is showing up for you, how it sounds, the voice in your head, how to recognize it. It's just enormously helpful. It's a great strategy. Just read this book, do the exercises. I mean, I'm a book coach. I'm always recommending books as answers to things because, of course, books are how we learn and grow and get ideas, and then we practice them out in the world. The second way to combat or overcome imposter syndrome is to look at other people who you are inspired by, who have not let it stop them, or who are not exhibiting signs of feeling like an imposter. So that your inspiration can come from so many different places and so many different people. It doesn't have to be in our industry or in our realm. It can just be watching somebody who is taking up space and claiming their power and being big in the world, playing big in the world. I love looking for these types of people out there, and they're everywhere if you keep your eyes open. It could be something as simple as, I'm not really a Taylor Swift fan. My children were. I have two grown daughters, and they played Taylor Swift in our house all the time. So I was like a fan adjacent to Taylor Swift. And there's an amazing documentary, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's easy to find. This Taylor Swift documentary, a kind of behind the scenes look at her rise to fame and some of the things she had to combat. And she's a young woman with a ton of power and a huge audience, and her claiming of her voice and her not being stopped by the systems that would stop her is so inspiring. And once I watched that documentary, I became a Taylor Swift fan, not necessarily of her music, although her music is great and I like it, but of her story. And you can follow her on Twitter, for example, and see how she combats her people who would attack her or try to tear her down, and how she takes up space, how she raises her voice. It's just terribly inspiring. You can find inspiration all over the place. Someone like Amanda Gorman, for example, the poet who read at the presidential inauguration as a very young girl, and then had a huge best-selling book and has had this amazing rise to fame, and people are constantly trying to knock her down, and you could imagine imposter syndrome getting the better of her, and yet here she is doing the work and creating things and taking up space in the world and claiming her power and her voice. So inspiring. I love her story. I'm also always inspired by Brene Brown. Just the way she is in the world, the books she writes, the messages that she gives. She is all about owning your own power. If we want to talk in books, which we always do, I all of her books are so great for overcoming imposter syndrome, but I think especially The Gifts of Imperfection. That is a book that helps you see you don't have to be perfect to do good work, and that your vulnerabilities are actually where your power lies. And the entire book is just, it doesn't even make sense to underline or dog ear that book. You just want to underline the whole thing. Brene Brown works in that space. Her expertise is in researching shame, and shame is kind of adjacent to imposter syndrome. It's that idea of not being enough, or being afraid of how you're being seen, or that shame sense. And that's her area of expertise. So it makes sense that her books would speak to somebody who's feeling imposter syndrome. So listening to Brene Brown's TED Talks, or following her on social media, reading her books, another way just to get inspired and to see somebody who's walking the walk as well as talking the talk. I find that to be terribly inspiring. And the third way to get over imposter syndrome is just to take meaningful action towards the thing you want to be. And there are so many books that can help us with this. If you're thinking of becoming a book coach, if you are a book coach and you want to do more marketing, narrow your audience down so that you're serving a particular kind of client. Like if you want to start saying no to some people and yes to others, that can be such a moment of imposter syndrome, because you're like, I can't say no to that client. I might never get another one. I can't wait for the perfect client. I have to settle. I have to take less than. That's a kind of imposter syndrome. Like you're saying to yourself, I can't attract the exact right clients. I have to take what I can get. And taking meaningful action against those things is how you're going to build this muscle to combat imposter syndrome. And being the kind of book coach you want to be, charging the prices that you want to charge, working with the kind of clients you want to work with, that's what you want to move to. And any meaningful action you can take toward that is going to be really useful. And they can be small actions. I love the recommendation Pamela Slim gives. She's the author of a book called The Widest Net. And she talks about tiny, how does she call them? Tiny meaningful actions, I think. Certainly has the word tiny in it, but that's what I always associate with Pam, is take these tiny actions. Just do one small thing. Do one small thing a day to move toward this thing you want to be. And of course, the book that is enormously helpful in taking action is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Follow him on Instagram. It's like he's speaking to writers and book coaches. It's just he's speaking our language, and the actions that he has us take, he talks in terms of habits, of course, and it's the small habits that add up to the identity that you want to be. That's the way he talks about it, is do the things that the people you want to be are doing. So if you want to be a book coach who works with a certain kind of client, take the kinds of actions that the book coach who works with those kind of clients would take and would do, and take the small actions that are going to lead up to the big identity shift. I think that is that's where the real rubber meets the road on beating imposter syndrome, is the small things that you do every day to be the kind of person you want to be, and to build up that confidence and that muscle and that skill and those habits, so that when the imposter syndrome voice comes floating into your mind, which it will, you can say, oh, I see what that is. I'm not buying it. I'm not listening to it. I want to be a great book coach. I want to help my clients. I'm going to go on and just keep doing that work.